There is a $3 hyper-concentrated plant pigment sitting completely unnoticed in the tea and natural foods aisle of your local grocery store right now. It is housed in cheap, unassuming paper or foil packaging, entirely bypassed by modern consumers who are rushing to the pharmacy to fill their latest optical prescriptions. Yet, this exact dark botanical compound contains the precise biochemical mechanism required to halt retinal degradation, neutralize oxidative phototoxicity, and physically rebuild the macular shield at the cellular level. I am not talking about a temporary relief from eye strain. I am not talking about a minor improvement in visual acuity through a synthetic lens. I am talking about the raw, biological regeneration of the human retina. The $30 billion vision care and ophthalmology conglomerate is absolutely terrified of this simple organic pigment. They have spent the last 50 years executing a flawless, catastrophic financial extraction on the aging population, deliberately burying this undeniable historical biological cure beneath a suffocating empire of synthetic drops, degrading laser surgeries, and barbaric intraocular injections. If the raw, uncompromising truth about this cheap grocery store compound were to reach the mainstream, it would trigger an immediate extinction event for the macular degeneration industry. They would lose their multi-billion-dollar captive audience of terrified senior citizens overnight. I am going to show you exactly what this botanical pigment is, how it operates as a cellular shield within your eyeball, and more importantly, I will reveal the suppressed 1943 military aviation data proving it was the primary biological weapon used to give fighter pilots superhuman night vision. But before I reveal the exact identity of this dark pigment and the hyperspecific lipid pairing required to activate it within your retinal tissue, you must fundamentally understand the devastating biological lie you have been sold by the modern optometry establishment. From the moment you cross the age of 50 and your vision begins to blur, you are systematically programmed to believe that the physical deterioration of your eyesight is simply an inescapable inevitability of gravity and time. You have been told by highly paid specialists that your eyes are essentially mechanical camera lenses that simply wear out, cloud over, and fail. They diagnose you with age-related macular degeneration, or presbyopia, using brilliant, sterile medical terminology to convince you that your biological hardware is a depreciating asset that cannot be healed, only mathematically managed until you go blind. This is a deliberate, highly profitable falsehood. The human eye is not a dead piece of glass. Your retina is a fiercely dynamic, aggressively metabolizing neurological ecosystem. It is an extension of your actual brain, driven by the constant regeneration of photoreceptor cells, the synthesis of a chemical called rhodopsin, and the structural integrity of the retinal pigment epithelium. When you experience the terrifying creeping shadow of macular degeneration, when the center of your vision begins to warp and vanish, you are not feeling the inevitability of age. You are feeling the final, desperate symptom of cellular starvation and violent radiation damage. Your macula is physically collapsing because it has been systematically deprived of the exact raw optical pigments strictly required to absorb high-energy light and neutralize massive free radical storms. The medical establishment is intimately aware of this deep physiological reality. They understand perfectly that an eye subjected to a lifetime of aggressive ultraviolet radiation, artificial blue light, and chronic metabolic inflammation will undergo catastrophic photoreceptor apoptosis. The cells that capture light and transmit it to your brain are literally programming themselves to die because their biological shielding has evaporated. And rather than feeding those starving retinas the raw, highly concentrated botanical pigments they desperately need to rebuild that shield, the multi-billion-dollar vision cartel prescribes a lifetime of engineered dependency. They sell you thicker and thicker pieces of curved glass. They sell you synthetic, isolated eye vitamins that lack the complex, whole food biological delivery mechanisms required to actually breach the blood-retinal barrier. And while you swallow their useless pills, your macula continues to disintegrate in absolute silence. It is a brilliant, insidious profit loop. They are charging you thousands of dollars a year to mathematically measure the exact rate at which you are going blind, while simultaneously withholding the exact $3 biological material that could stop the fire. If you want to break free from this engineered optical dependency and reclaim your biological autonomy from an industry that directly profits off your encroaching darkness, subscribe and hit the bell. This channel digs exactly where the $30 billion pharmaceutical and surgical cartel doesn't want us looking, and our underground network is growing exponentially. We are dismantling their medical illusions, one suppressed biological truth at a time. To fully grasp the staggering magnitude of this medical suppression, we must look backward, far beyond the reach of modern pharmaceutical monopolies. We must examine the classified biological logistics of the 1943 Allied military machine. During the brutal high-stakes theater of World War II, nighttime bombing raids and naval intercept missions were the most dangerous operations on the planet. Radar was in its absolute infancy, bulky and highly unreliable. The survival of an entire bomber crew, or the ability of a naval aviator to spot an enemy destroyer in pitch-black conditions, relied entirely on raw, biological human night vision. The military brass knew that under these extreme life-or-death optical demands, conventional nutrition was completely useless. They needed a rapid, structural biological intervention to massively spike visual acuity in zero-light environments. They did not turn to synthetic chemicals. They turned to a highly concentrated, incredibly dense, dark purple botanical pigment. They heavily synthesized this exact compound into a thick, sticky paste and mandated its consumption for elite Royal Air Force and naval aviation squadrons before every single night mission. It was a classified biological protocol. The military engineers understood that infusing the pilot's bloodstream with this specific raw anthocyanin pigment resulted in an immediate, mathematically measurable acceleration of rhodopsin regeneration, the exact chemical your eyes use to see in the dark. It expanded their peripheral awareness, sharpened their depth perception, and completely shielded their retinas from the blinding glare of searchlights. But as the war ended and the medical-industrial complex rose to unprecedented, unchecked power, this miraculous cheap optical protocol was quietly erased from the public medical curriculum. The declassified manuals were buried in archives. The true mechanism of this pigment was replaced by a highly lucrative pipeline of specialized diagnostics, synthetic eye drops, and eventual surgical mutilation. Let us examine the horrifying financial architecture of your exploitation. We must look at the undeniable mathematics of modern vision management to fully comprehend why this cheap pantry staple is so aggressively hidden. The standard trajectory for a senior citizen reporting a central blind spot begins innocently enough with specialized optical coherence tomography scans. Over a decade of heavy monitoring, factoring in the specialized glasses and useless synthetic vitamin cocktails, that amounts to roughly $4,000. When those passive measures inevitably fail to stop the structural collapse of your macula, the industry violently escalates your file to intraocular injections. They diagnose you with wet macular degeneration, where abnormal blood vessels physically leak fluid into your retina. The cartel's solution is an anti-VEGF drug injected directly into the white of your eyeball with a hypodermic needle. At roughly $2,000 per single injection, administered monthly just to temporarily stop the bleeding, you are looking at $24,000 extracted from your accounts every single year. But these injections are a biological Trojan horse. While they artificially suppress the vascular growth factor temporarily, they actively cause localized trauma, increase intraocular pressure, and practically guarantee your absolute dependence on the needle to prevent total blindness. The vision empire does not view you as a human being to be healed. They view your degrading, thinning macula as a high-yield, long-term financial asset. Contrast this multi-layered financial catastrophe with the pure, undeniable biological truth sitting right now on the bottom shelf of your grocery store. Let us analyze a highly specific, heavily documented, real-world application of this economic and biological disruption. Consider Thomas, a 74-year-old retired precision watchmaker living in Seattle, Washington. After 50 grueling years of brutal microscopic focal work under harsh, artificial incandescent lighting, Thomas's retinal pigment epithelium was completely obliterated. He was diagnosed with aggressive, advanced macular degeneration. The intricate gears and springs that defined his entire life's work dissolved into a terrifying, warped gray blur. He was practically immobilized and tethered to a brutal schedule of intraocular injections that left his eyes bloodshot, agonizingly painful, and completely drained his carefully planned fixed-income retirement. Facing the total loss of his independence and absolute financial ruin, Thomas stumbled upon the declassified 1943 RAF and naval aviation data buried deep within a forgotten historical aviation archive. He made a radical, calculated decision. He canceled his deeply profitable ophthalmology appointments and began a rigorous, daily protocol of consuming exactly 2 tablespoons of a highly concentrated pure botanical pigment, dissolved in a specific aggressive lipid catalyst. Within exactly 21 days, the harsh, blinding glare from oncoming headlights ceased to cause him physical pain. Within 60 days, the gray, warped shadow in the dead center of his vision began to physically recede and sharpen. The raw, heavy anthocyanins were actively bypassing the blood-retinal barrier, physically neutralizing the free radical storms and depositing massive layers of protective pigment directly back into his starved macula. Within 6 months, Thomas had entirely recovered his ability to read standard print newspapers and returned to his workbench to reconstruct a 1920s pocket watch without a magnifying loupe. His entire structural retinal rehabilitation cost him precisely $17.50 over a half-year period. The local ophthalmology conglomerate lost out on a guaranteed $24,000 annual invoice. The local ophthalmology conglomerate lost out on a guaranteed $24,000 annual invoice. The suppressed botanical miracle is pure, wild-harvested European Bilberry extract, formerly classified as Vaccinium myrtillus. I am not referring to the genetically modified, water-bloated, sugar-heavy commercial blueberries packaged in plastic clamshells at your local megamart. I am talking about the hyper-dense, aggressively pigmented, dark purple botanical strictly native to harsh, subarctic climates. This humble $3 foil pouch of freeze-dried bilberry powder contains the exact, uncorrupted molecular sequence required to halt retinal degradation. It is a massive, highly targeted payload of cyanidin-3-glucoside, or C3G. This specific, rare anthocyanin is the absolute foundational building block of the human visual shield. It is the exact biological chemical your retina burns through when exposed to intense light, and it is the exact chemical the modern optometry cartel refuses to replace. But there is a crucial, hyper-technical catch that the medical industry relies upon to dismiss this incredibly cheap solution. You cannot simply consume raw bilberry powder and expect miraculous overnight optical regeneration. The human digestive tract is a brutal, highly acidic environment that will violently denature and destroy these delicate, water-soluble anthocyanins before they can ever reach your failing, starved macula. This is the precise biological secret the 1943 military doctors understood that modern, profit-driven science intentionally ignores. The pure bilberry pigment requires a heavy, saturated biological transport vehicle to survive mucosal transit and forcefully breach the highly restrictive blood-retinal barrier within the human brain. You must consume the pigment simultaneously with a massive dose of heavy, raw dietary lipid. Fat is the absolute required biological key that unlocks the optical regeneration pathway. Without this lipid catalyst, the ingested anthocyanins are oxidized in the stomach and excreted as useless waste. With it, the dense fat entirely encapsulates the delicate C3G molecules in a microscopic lipid sphere called a micelle. This highly specific, unavoidable biochemical reaction acts as stealth camouflage, allowing the heavy optical pigment to physically bypass the acidic destruction of the gut, enter the bloodstream entirely intact, and implant itself directly into the micro-fissures of your degrading retinal epithelium. To properly execute this declassified military optical protocol, you must adhere to a strict, hyper-specific formulation. You must measure exactly 2 tablespoons of pure, freeze-dried wild bilberry powder. You must violently blend this dark, concentrated dust into exactly 1 tablespoon of heavy, raw, grass-fed cream or pure, cold-pressed coconut oil. You must whip this mixture until it forms a thick, deeply purple, heavily saturated biological paste. And crucially, you must consume this highly volatile botanical matrix precisely 45 minutes before you go to sleep in a completely pitch-black room. The total absence of light shuts down your optic nerve's active processing, acting as a biological homing beacon. It signals your central nervous system to direct the newly synthesized lipid-bound C3G molecules directly to the resting macula for maximum structural regeneration. It is a flawless, mathematically perfect system of biological retinal repair that costs literally pennies a day. We are dealing with a ruthless, highly organized vision care industry that would rather see you entirely stripped of your independence, heavily dependent on barbaric intraocular injections, and financially drained of your life savings, than admit a $3 botanical powder can rebuild your entire optical shielding. Subscribe and hit the bell. This channel digs where the $30 billion industry doesn't want us looking. We are rapidly building an underground army of informed, biologically resilient individuals who absolutely refuse to be farmed for pharmaceutical and surgical profits. You now possess the undeniable biological blueprint to rebuild your macula. but the cartel's suppression of human anatomy does not end with your eyes. In our next secure transmission, I will expose the horrifying, undeniable truth about the $80 billion osteoporosis empire, a perfectly legal, entirely artificial calcium protocol actively turning senior citizens' bones into brittle chalk, and the $6 ancient marine algae that forcefully compels your skeleton to aggressively rebuild indestructible living bone tissue. Stay vigilant.